Okay, so yeah, weekly check-in. We're gonna look at how to write a sociology paper today. I've decided that the week 10, so I think that would be March 15th for your class or your tutorial section. We'll do the part two of this how to write a paper for sociology. So just keep that in mind if you want to write that date down. We're gonna finish that series, and then yeah, today later, we're just gonna be talking about getting started on the paper, how to conduct a literature review, and setting up the introduction. And then I'm also going to go through at the end just the citation styles that Edwin has listed you can use for this paper, and then give you some examples. I just pulled a few examples from my thesis research to show you some in-text citation as well in an APA style format. So does anyone have any questions before we move on here? Okay. So, writing a paper. I just pulled a couple things I thought that were important from the outline, just to kind of reiterate. About 6 to 8 pages. Usually, A papers are always closer to the 6 range, to the minimum number, and then as you go from A's to A minuses to B's, generally papers get longer and longer and longer, because people haven't done as much editing as those papers that are in the A range. So usually you can get it down to between that 6 to 8 page range. Then if you're over that, it's kind of tough to get an A, but you can still get A's. I still give A's for having a bit of overwriting done, as long as the paper's still really, really good. I just want to double check and make sure that everyone's inside. Okay, great. Yeah, so key thing is asking a sociological question. So we'll go over that in a few minutes, what that actually looks like in terms of asking, or in comparison to, say, asking a psychological question, a biology question. Sociologists talk about specific things. And so we'll talk about how to ask a sociological question. Using academic sources and high quality articles. It's really important that you use peer-reviewed articles for your mandatory academic articles. We're going to go over today during our web search what peer-reviewed articles actually look like in comparison to, say, newspaper articles or non-peer-reviewed articles. And we're going to go through how we can set up actually being sure that when we do click it, we're actually able to access peer-reviewed articles. Plagiarism, the first online semester was obviously kind of the wild, wild west of online semesters. So I think students and generally got away with plagiarism and cheating as well on exams, as well as writing papers. But I can tell you that after this last semester, this semester, all of the TAs, myself included, will really be paying attention, far more attention, to making sure that plagiarism is not happening with these papers. So really important that you make sure that you're citing your own work, and that you're writing your own work as well for this paper, as with all papers. Yeah, the 3 citation styles that are allowed: ASA, APA, and Chicago. We're going to go through what a journal article and a newspaper article should look like. You'll find that they're actually pretty much the same, just in terms of like how you're actually doing and citing, and even across the newspaper article and journal article in your respective citation forms, that they're pretty much the same as well. And yeah, this paper's due at the end of March, so just another important date you might want to put away. So writing a paper, starting the process. I just wrote here, I have no idea where to start, and I wrote, thank God. And basically I wrote that as a bit of a joke, that when you're coming into university, your mind is still relatively free. Professors, TAs, myself, we haven't done too much to kind of tell you how we want you to think. So this is a good thing. If you don't know where to start with your paper, it means that you are still open to questions about sociology, that and still relatively unbiased towards the way you direct those questions. So this is a good thing. So picking a topic you're interested in by asking a simple question that you can get an answer to. This seems straightforward, but a lot of students don't actually realize that they're asking questions that are really difficult. So I got a question yesterday in my email. A student asked, "Hey, I really want to write about something to do with COVID and unpaid labor, or something with, should people be getting, because everyone's staying at home, or has this brought more attention to, people who are staying at home and working, and should they actually be paid for this work? And I thought that it was a really good sociological question. But when I asked the student, like, if they thought it was going to be likely that there were going to be a lot of academic articles already written on this subject in the last year, it was probably unlikely, right? So sometimes asking a question you can get an answer to is like a temporal thing. If it's too recent, you might have a tough time actually finding articles. And sometimes the question itself isn't actually something you can find an answer to. It's too big, or it's too grand of a topic for you to really get to the bottom of it in 6 to 8 pages. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how to do that. So I just created a few questions here to get us thinking about sociological questions. So what are the key sociological pressures that lead to drug addiction? Remember, like, key sociological language. What can Durkheim's functionalist perspective reveal about current what does that say? Oh, health policy towards coronavirus? Again, another sociological question we can see, using Durkheim obviously is going to give us some sort of sociological answer. And how do social realities influence our political beliefs? Again, looking at social realities and how they're going to impact what we view politically. And again, can sexuality be changed through social learning? Asking a question like this is obviously embedded in sociological processes, because we're looking to see if something can actually be learned through socialization that we've always assumed to be biological. Okay, so that just gives you an indication of what that is. So in terms of starting with your question and breaking it down into keywords, we're going to use this one as an example. So what are the key sociological pressures that lead to drug addiction? So what is a sociological pressure? So sociological pressure is something that causes us to behave in a certain way. Some institution, some set of social ideas that exists externally to the human being, the human subject, that leads us into one direction or another, that forces us to behave in such and such a way. So we can think of education as being a sociological pressure, normative rules and laws, folkways, mores, right? These things that are sociological pressures. How are the laws set up, right? The economic system that we're part of, right? What about our family structure, and how does that lead to how does that become a sociological pressure that perhaps can lead to drug addiction? So you're seeing how I'm breaking down my question into smaller parts in order to ask questions that are sociological, right? So what does the literature review reveal about the reasons for drug addiction, and are these reasons sociological? i.e., do they involve human-to-human influence that leads to behavioral change? So what I'm going to do is go through, if I was going to ask this particular question of what sociological pressures lead to drug addiction, let's throw this into the UVic database and have a look and see what comes up here. So I've just gone to uvic.ca. I'm in library. Let's see, I've broken my question down into social pressure and drug addiction. So I'm going to just go in here. I can search right away, but this is always a little bit difficult, right? So I think because, it's just so broad. So what I'm going to do right away is just click advanced search. And so what I'm going to do up here in the keywords is I'm going to write social pressures and drug addiction, right? Now I could just search that and I would probably get a whole bunch of articles, which would be really, really useful. But these articles might be all over the place. There might be, articles on politics, or articles on, drug addiction, but more related to like a biochemistry article, right? So just because I have social pressures in there doesn't mean I'm going to get sociological articles. So then what I would do, I put in my 2 keywords, and remember, this can just be one search, and then I can take this out and just do another search, and then I can take this out and put like drug addiction and society, or I can just, do a whole bunch of searches like that. So we'll go back to the original. Right? And I can do a whole bunch of searches like that. So I'll go to my content type here. What we're looking for these particular papers is journal articles, peer-reviewed journal articles, in fact. So I would click journal article, journal article. That should be okay. And let's say, maybe I want to look at maybe newspaper articles as well, right? So I put that in there. And that's pretty much it. I don't really want to look at book chapters too specifically for this kind of paper, just because of the size of it. And it might also cause some complications with citation that I don't know about. So if I keep it simple, I know I can do that part well. So, and then what I do is in disciplines, we could click economics, right? Education might be relevant here. But I think what I'll do just for simplicity's sake is go right down, just to sociology and social history, and I'm just going to click that one. And lastly, I'm going to go to the limit to section here. I'm looking for items with full text online, and I'm looking for scholarly materials, including peer reviewed. And that way, you know that the articles you're going to get are peer reviewed journal articles. They're not just going to be some master's dissertation that hasn't been peer reviewed yet, which wouldn't count in your citation list for part of this rubric, right? So I would click search. Okay. And then I get a list of articles, right? So critical social policy, good. So, I mean, the first thing I would do is I would, start looking at these abstracts if I was doing this paper, and I would look to see, okay, well, social pressures and drug addiction, what looks like a social pressure? Alcohol, like addiction might be, something important. Oh, indigenous communities, maybe there's something to do with being raised in indigenous communities that can, as places in Canada that would perhaps lead to a more likelihood of developing drug addiction because of poverty related issues. So that might be a good article. So maybe what I'll do is I think the first thing I would do is I just click the journal article here, sign in UVic, da, da, da. And then I think before I even read the article, what I would do is just copy and paste this abstract and then write down the bibliography information. And so the bibliography information is usually up here. So this is the name of the journal article. We have the name here. We have the name of the author. We got the date. We have everything that we need here. And then obviously the article is all here. But just for the sake of our literature review, what I want to do is get a whole bunch of abstracts together. And you can use this for other courses as well, right? This isn't just for sociology. This is really important. I just copy and paste this, put it in a Word doc, put the bibliographical information there right away, maybe on top of it, and then I'd move to the next article. And maybe I'd find, in an hour, I could find 15 articles or 20 articles if I felt so keen, and then I would have a good basis for doing my search there. Okay. And really the difference, just to go back here, right? The difference between, an A literature review and everything else, one is the amount of articles you have. First of all, you have to meet the requirements of the rubric, which I think is 4 academic articles. It might be 5, but once again, just refer back to that before you actually submit your paper. That's always the most important thing to do. And then, the difference is really like, how many articles you actually have, how relevant those articles are, because how relevant those articles are going to lead to the relevancy of answering your actual research question on social pressure and drug addiction, right? And again, right, trying to look for sociology and cultural studies focused journals are really the best bet here. And by doing that advanced search, that really helps us. So I would take my literature review, I'd take all of my articles, and I'd look to see kind of what themes would emerge, right? Are there any articles that suggest some social pressures over others as being the best predictor of drug addiction? So environmentally determined mental health problems, childhood abuse, generational poverty. So let's say I find, 15 articles or 10 articles, and that's what I notice. I notice that out of those 10 to 15 articles, that 3 or 4 of them are talking about the same social pressure. Aha, light bulb goes on my head. Now I have kind of the first set of themes I'm going to talk about in my discussion, right? And so a good literature review is going to be big enough so that you can actually start to notice patterns in the literature that you're seeing as it's related to your research question, assuming that your keywords that you've put in were specific enough to that research question, and your advanced search was specific enough to the discipline that you're actually asking a question from. So your lit review should reveal several central themes that are relevant to your research question. If they don't, you've probably selected articles that are not as relevant as you think, right? And this happens all the time when I'm marking these papers. Students will take articles that aren't really sociological, but they're maybe more biology based or psychology based, and that's totally fine. Especially for me as a TA, I'm really open to an interdisciplinary approach when answering a lot of research questions, especially in sociology, because it does cross over. But if the whole paper is talking about like the neurotransmitter release as a result of some genetic anomaly, then and that leading to drug addiction, then we're talking not really so much about a sociology and social pressures of drug addiction. We're talking about something else entirely. So Are there any questions before we move on to talking about the introduction? Cool. So, introduction for me as a marker and also as a writer is the most important part of your writing. It's really hard, especially nowadays, to get anybody to read what you write. Trust me, doing a master's and you want people to read what you're doing, if your introduction isn't spicy, people will often lose interest very, very quickly, especially in this technology world where our concentration thresholds are that much more minimal. You want to make sure that you have an introduction that says to the reader, wow, this is really interesting. And you want to try and provoke the reader right away, right? So the introduction is really conceptually what's going to set up the rest of your paper. It's what's going to tell the reader what to actually expect in very clear language, in very simple language, what you're actually doing. And so the introduction is based and made into these three components, right? So there's the hook, the map, and then finally your tone, your thesis, your purpose, the actual intention of the author, which you'll want to stay to the end, right? So what is the hook? Well, you want to start your intro with an interesting but simple sentence, a quote, a reference, a poem, an analogy, something that engages the reader. And really what this is a moment where the writer, if successful, becomes able to access the mind of the reader, right? Which is evidenced by the continued reading by the reader of your work. So can you intrigue them? Can you provoke them, right? Can you generate a genuine emotional response in your reader that gets them interested in what you're actually writing about? Because you have to remember, like, they might, if I'm writing a thesis on mixed martial arts, they might have nothing to do in their life with mixed martial arts. So why would they care about what I'm writing? Well, if I open the thesis with a commentary on the nature of human suffering and existential anxiety in that context, oh, wait, well, maybe that will actually relate to their experience. And now, oh, he's doing it through a martial arts lens. Okay, well, maybe I'm going to stay engaged here. So it's something about kind of thinking about anticipating your audience. The hook really takes a long time, and you can see in the background I got a little fisherman there throwing a hook, but that's really kind of what it's all about. And really, yeah, the clickbait is like kind of the best example of what the hook is if you're trying to understand it conceptually, even though I think clickbait is like the worst thing ever in the world. But also I think like it is kind of the where the hook went at its pinnacle. You could say that the clickbait is like the pinnacle of the hook, right? It makes you click on it, right? And then, usually it's not what you want to read, or it's not always very good writing, but at least you clicked on it. And I guess for a lot of these companies and these industries, that's all that matters. Okay, so that's the hook. Does anyone have any questions before we move on here? Okay. Once again, please interrupt me if you have any questions during the lecture. Just do that whenever you want. Okay, so the map. So this is where you insert the direction of the paper, again, in very simple language, as directed by your wonderfully insightful literature review that has revealed your relevant themes, which will eventually become the arguments in your discussion, which we'll talk about in the last, in part 2 of this series on how to write a paper. And so really, what these relevant themes do and what your map does is helps explain how you approached your research question, what themes you saw, and what themes you're going to talk about after this introduction here. So, and here I just wrote down below. So after you've given me your hook, you've given an introduction to what I'm supposed to be reading, which has got me engaged. And then your paper should sort of have a sentence that looks like this. Like, this paper first looks at X, so some phenomenon, followed by a related discussion of Y, some other theme that you've pulled out from your literature review, and Z. And it might just be X and Y, or Z. It might just be 2 things. It might be 3 themes. It's really up to you depending on the depth you went into them. And so this paper does this, and then looks at this, and then looks at this in order to develop your purpose, right? Which we can know as the intention, which is what you're going to say at the bottom of your introduction. So what do you intend to argue? What do you intend to discuss, critique, explore, suggest as something that's important for the reader to understand? As a result of the literature review themes that have led, that have basically influenced you in this research process, right? So what arguments, what evidence which has led you to this new and wonderful conclusion about the best explanation of sociological pressures behind drug addiction, right? And so really that's what you want to do at the end of your introduction, is have this good purpose statement, this intention. It can be to compare and contrast something. It can be to show the chronology of like how drug addiction and social pressures have changed over time, right? It can be some purpose that's going to be once again, dependent on the themes that you found, and that's up to you. Now, this purpose usually comes in the form of an argument, right? And so an argument has the following sentence structure. So we can just write here, I contend, I argue, I posit, I suggest that P, so this thing is the case or is true because of reasons X and Y, or Q and W. And so when you're looking at what I've written here, it can seem kind of confusing. Like, what do you mean this structure? But when I mean it, I just mean, like, logically speaking, from a philosophical standpoint, in order for it to be construed an actual argument, or sorry, considered an actual argument, it has to have the structure where there's a conclusion and then premises that follow, or sorry, a conclusion. I'm sorry, it should have premises and then a conclusion that logically follows from those premises, right? And so that's kind of what this structure here looks like. If P is true, it's because of X and W, and that's what your thesis statement should look like structurally, right? So if your purpose or thesis statement does not have the structure, a clear conclusion, and premises for that conclusion, reasons for that conclusion, then you may have a weak thesis statement and lack the clarity for an A paper. And it's really that simple. Yeah, I don't know how else to describe it, but I think, like, no matter what, sometimes this gets lost in translation when we're trying to construct an actual argument and not just a statement. So just keep that in mind, that an argument has these two components. It has a conclusion that you're saying is true or false or whatever, and you're giving reasons as well as part of that conclusion. And that's what a thesis statement actually is. So the introduction, final thoughts. The introduction isn't something, at least from my experience, when I was an undergraduate, for some reason, I always felt that I had to write the introduction first. And maybe that's because introduction, right, should be first. But I realized through graduate school and then through writing more and more that writing your introduction last is a way better technique, because by the time you get to the end of your paper, you're actually going to know what you're trying to say and talk about. And then you can actually put that into your introduction, instead of starting with ideas that might change as you go through the research process, and should change if the evidence changes as well, right? And so writing your introduction last is probably the best way to actually ensure that it is a good introduction that corresponds to what you've actually written in your body paragraphs. So lit review, your map, and your thesis statement should alter slightly after you finish editing your paper, and this is great. And this, as I said, it means you are being forced to edit your conclusions to line up more consistently with the evidence of the literature and the research, and not your previously concepted biases that you brought into the research, right? Perfect. Before we move on to the end of our discussion today about citation, does anyone have any questions about the introduction, its basic structure? Okay. Again, this is going to be available on the YouTube channel I created. Oh, I think I got a question here. One sec here in the chat. No, it disappeared. Oh, yeah. So I don't know the precise. Good question. I don't know the precise word count, but I know it's 6 to 8 pages, and usually a page double space is about 500 words. So that gives you a bit of an indication, right? 2,000, so roughly 3,000 to 3,500 words or so, I think, is what it should be. So good question. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, I got more questions. Okay. Okay, so someone's corrected me here and said it's roughly 250 words per page when double space. So I can go back and have a look at that as well, but I would just say, yeah, 6 to 8 pages double space is what you want to do. Thank you for the recommendation that it's 250 words instead of 500, but yeah. Okay, let's move on. Citation styles. So there's 3 citation styles that are listed on the outline or on the rubric. And citation is always something that confuses students coming into university. I mean, it confuses people even into graduate school. It still confuses me. But what I would just say, some key things about citation to remember is just pick one, obviously, and be consistent when you pick that one. So just be consistent in the way that you're actually citing. One thing I've noticed about citation is like, even though somebody's doing ASA or APA, even in like academic articles, I can tell this person's doing APA, but there's even like slight deviations that some authors do within the citation style. So as long as you're consistent with the style, if there's a comma where there should be a colon or something like that, like I'm not going to penalize you too much, right? But just try to remain consistent for every article that you're actually you're citing. So I just gave 3 examples here, just from one of the articles in my thesis here. So here's an APA article, academic article. You have the last name of the author, the first name, period, brackets with the date. And then you can see that the sentence here of the actual article, the title, is all lowercase. One thing that doesn't say here is that if there's an article with a semicolon between 2 clauses, then the first part, so like here, would be capitalized. And then if there's a colon after, let's say, gender, then the I here in would be capitalized. But I just didn't have an article on here to show you that. So that's an APA academic article. An ASA academic article would look like something like this. So you got the full name, you take the brackets out, your whole title is capitalized, the main nouns and words, and then there's a quotations here as well of the whole article. And then you can see a slight difference here in terms of the actual name of the journal article, which is in the italics, just like in the APA and also in Chicago. And then you can see that there's a slight deviation between the colon and the comma, but otherwise the ASA is very close. And then the Chicago one's a little bit different than both of them. We have the date at the end over here, but similar kind of just commas instead, separating everything. So you can see the slight deviations in all 3. And once again, it's up to you which citation style you want to use. Now, as far as in-text citation, I've just chosen, oh, wait, before I get to that, I'll show you again. So this is like a newspaper article. It's basically the exact same, except like your newspaper article wouldn't be an academic or peer-reviewed article. It would just be like, instead of saying societies, it would say like New York Times or CNN online news or something like that. So you get an indication that it's basically the same. And then also I just wrote here that if you have the link to the newspaper article, then you want to do that. But for an academic article, you don't need to provide the web link that you found the article. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? Awesome. Okay. So I just chose some like in-text citation examples just to give you a bit of an understanding in terms of using an APA. I think in Chicago, you're supposed to, the big difference is your bibliography, instead of being at the end, like with ASA and APA, your bibliography is in the footnotes, I think, but don't quote me on that. That could be MLA, but that's something, if you are going to use Chicago, you'll definitely want to look in with Edwin. I'm not an expert on Chicago style. I'm just only done APA and ASA. So yeah, if you're going to use Chicago, make sure you run it by me, and then I'll do another check to make sure. But just from memory, APA and ASA for in-text citation is kind of what I've done. So I've given you just a bit of an indication here what this looks like. And so really what you see, especially in this first one in the top left here, is a paraphrasing of the actual argument that Shannon's making in this article. So although I do quote directly consensual here, I then paraphrase in my own words what the article is actually about. And you can see I just put the date in brackets so we know which article in my bibliography it's referring to, and then I go on to paraphrase it. Over here, you can see that I give an actual kind of sentence, a quotation, and so I put the page number in here with a semicolon, and then I continue to paraphrase what I think it means, right? So, and then over in the top right here, we can see that I talk about Shannon in another article, and then so that this comma here indicates that this is the first part that I'm paraphrasing for his article. And then after this, you can see that all these authors here is just this part of the block paragraph here that's related to these authors here. So you can see how like in-text citation kind of works when you're paraphrasing. And then when you're not paraphrasing, such as these bottom two examples, the page numbers there, and then you can see that I've just included in text. And then you can see that the quotations actually go on the outside of the period here. And then one more quick thing. Because I'm citing Schopenhauer again right after I cited his first book and page number, all I need to do is put IBID here. And then if it's the page number, I can put the page number. And then if I'm just paraphrasing, I can just IBID. And IBID just means that like you're citing the same source right after another one to cite another idea from that thing. But if I like sent a whole bunch of other authors after I said this first 1927 part, then I wouldn't put IBID after, because then I wouldn't know if it was another author or not. So hopefully everybody sees the difference there.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah, sure.
In my academic writing class last semester, my prof said that for APA, when you use the same source like in a row, that instead of putting like that, you would just put like say so the Shannon 2015, like if you use that again without using another author, you would just put 2015. Is that right?
So I think you can do both. I
Okay.
think IBID just looks a little bit more professional. So if you want, I think like, yeah, I've seen people do both. Like I've done both. It's just like if you've ever seen, I was just kind of showing that IBID is just like another way of doing it that like authors do as well. So
Okay.
one to show you, yeah, thanks, sir. So one to show you that you,
The date would be okay too, like in
yeah, the
brackets.
date's fine. Like you can do both. It's not like it's not illegal in terms of
Okay.
citation. It just doesn't look as good, I think. Um,
Okay.
but that's just a matter of preference and it was also
Want to do that.
yeah. So and
Okay.
then just also so if you ever see IBID, you know that it's like citing the source already
Gotcha.
that was there. So thank you, Sarah. That's a good question. I got another. Oh yeah, yeah. Of course, you're allowed to use quotations in the paper. I was just showing you some good examples here of like in text paraphrasing, because paraphrasing is the best way to one show the reader that like you've really read the article and actually understand what was being said enough that you can put it in your own words. I think like most A papers will look something like this. They'll have like a quotation, but it'll either be a short quotation or it'll just be a pure paraphrase. A lot of like B and C papers will have big block quotations that don't really get explained. So if you are going to use direct quotations, just really be sure that like you explain the quotation and how it relates, like why it's actually in there for the reader. So you don't just like use a quote and then like move on. Make sure that you always explain why you're using the quote. What does it relate to? Tie it back to the argument. Does that make sense, Ava? Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, sweet. That is like pretty much it, I think, for today in terms of the first part of how to write a paper, part one. I can't think of anything else at this particular moment that we would want to discuss. Does anyone have any more questions before we close it out for today? Okay. Is there anything that I didn't really explain that's kind of confusing, or aside from the word count, which Kellen helped us figure out? Okay, sweet. If anyone has any questions, I'm always available on email. Just shoot me an email, and I can come back. Many students have done that already. And if you want to talk more detailed about your paper topic, we can set up a Zoom call and spitball some ideas back and forth as well, which I've done with a few students as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any more questions. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Thank you. Jessica and Kellen, do you have questions you want to ask, or are you just hanging out?
Yeah, I have a question. It's not about the paper though. It's about Pack.
Yeah, for sure. What's up?
So I've been having like a lot of here. I'll turn on my camera because I
Yeah, and if it's private, like we can talk if you don't care, because I think Kellen's here too. So it's always
no, it's okay.
okay.
I
Oh,
so
one second. Let me turn off the recording.
oh okay.